It's all about Knight Rider when I have the huge pleasure of talking to composer Don Peake, who composed the score for Knight Rider from the episode in season 1, Hearts of Stone, and throughout the show. Don's musical merits go far beyond Knight Rider, having worked with fantastic people like the Everly Brothers, the Righteous Brothers, Ray Charles, Ike and Tina Turner, and lots of other talented people. I hope that you enjoy this conversation. I've been messaging, writing with Don on and off for the better part of 3 years, and suddenly within a matter of 75 minutes we went from zero to everything and setting up this conversation. And as I say, it's all about Knight Rider. But I think that you'll appreciate all the other stories that Don has, and not least his love of cars. So enjoy this very much.
There you are.
Yes, hello.
Finally.
Yes, hello on the other side of the world. Mr. Don Peake. It's a pleasure. It is so fantastic that you would take time to do this talk about a part of your fantastic career that is probably not that interesting to many people, but it is to all the fans of Knight Rider.
Thank you.
And I must say, you look great.
Oh, thank you. That's because I'm wearing a hat.
So
now, Jacob, the reason I'm doing this interview with you is because you have been so, how can I say this? You have been persistent, certainly. But besides that, the things you have said to me in your emails and your texts or Zoom or your messaging, you always ask very intelligent questions, and it occurs to me, I'm 83 years old, so I'm not a young chicken anymore, and I want to share this information with you, and so it just makes me really happy that that you want to do this. So here you are, you've got a sketch of an automobile on the wall. Are you an engineer, or why are you involved with automobiles?
No, well, I'm just a Danish Knight Rider fan who fell in love with the kit, with the show, with everything around it when I was 10 years old. I watched only 12 episodes were on Danish state television back in '86 when I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with the car, and when I approached 40, I got the chance of owning my own kit replica, and then of course the interests really took off, and during the pandemic I got the idea, why not, I was friends with Jack Gill on Facebook, so I got the idea, why not try and send him a message and see if he'll be interested in doing a conversation regarding his work on Knight Rider, because everyone is at home and no one can do anything. And he replied in a positive way, and the Knight Rider historians Joe Huth and AJ Palmgren, they also saw that interview and asked me if I wanted to try to connect with the people in and around Knight Rider and make this type of background interviews for this huge Knight Rider audience to see. The Knight Rider historians has I think around 100,000 subscribers on their YouTube channel. So it's it is a huge hobby out in the world.
Great. Well, because I'm a California boy, and because I grew up with automobiles and driving stick shift cars, and are you aware that I was a race driver?
No, I know I wasn't. I know many of your merits, but primarily in the musician direction.
Well, as I tell my wife, because my wife will tell people, "Well, my husband, he drove race cars," and I said, "No, darling, I was a champion race car driver. I won races. I mean, a lot of idiots get out on the racetrack, but winning races consistently takes a particular style and technique and an understanding of automobiles. And so in 1967, 68, I was the Southern Pacific divisional champion of the United States. So that was California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona. I guess there were, anyway, all the Western states.
That is
And
amazing.
I set the record at Riverside Raceway for the fastest lap ever driven in a C sedan. I was driving for Lancia.
Okay,
I
yeah,
had
yeah, yeah.
an HF that I had modified. And the point was that winning races is very much, it's kind of a life lesson, because you want to go fast enough to be ahead, but slow enough to stay on the racetrack.
Yeah.
So you finish the race, and you don't want to hurt the car. And so you asked me some very good questions, and I'm just going to kind of wing it for a second, and then you can ask me things. I'm a California boy, went to Los Angeles High School, went to Los Angeles City College, joined the U.S. Coast Guard, and joined the military because they were drafting people in 1958. I joined the Coast Guard because I'm a sailor and I knew I was going to be around small boats. Did 8 years in the Coast Guard as a Coast Guard reservist, trained as a firefighter. All these things contributed to my skill as a composer, because I actually knew about these things. When a car was going fast, I knew what it was like because I'd been in a car going fast.
Yeah.
And when there was a fire, I was trained by the U.S. Navy as a firefighter. So, there are a lot of things that, and then in 1989, now I joined the LA County Sheriff's Department in 1989, but I started doing Knight Rider in 1982. And the reason, and you asked me, why did you get into Knight Rider? Well, Robert Foster, whom we had met as Bob Foster, and then he became, Robert Foster. He was offered the job to take over Knight Rider after the first 12 episodes. And the first 12 were done by Stu Phillips and that team. And then one of the producers had a heart attack and died. So Universal called Robert Foster. Now, I had scored a movie for television for NBC, and it was called I Desire the Vampire. And this was a big scale production of a vampire movie. And Foster, Green Epstein hired me. So now I show up at the score and they figure out, I'm going to show up with a guitar, but I showed up with a 45-piece orchestra and I did a real classical score. And so everybody was like, oh my gosh, So now that about 2 months later, they call Foster and say, we need you. So Robert Foster calls me and he says, Don, listen, Universal has asked me to do a show called Knight Rider. And I said, what's it about? And he said, well, it's about a car. And I said, well, I'm a car guy. I love cars. I studied mechanical engineering in college. And he says, well, it's about a car and it's a law enforcement kind of show. And I told Universal, I won't do the show unless they hire you. So that's what happened. They called up Stu Phillips and they said, thank you very much, but Universal has decided to go on with this different composer. We want to do a more science fiction and we want more synthesizers, and Robert Foster insists we have to have Don Peake. So I want to settle that once and for all, because Stu Phillips has always been bitter about this and thought that somehow I had, caused this, but I did not do anything except write the score for I Desire.
Yeah.
And if you're lucky, Jacob, I will mail you a copy. Do you still have a CD player?
Yeah, yeah, I do. Yeah, believe it or not, yes, I do.
Because most people don't. And I will send you a copy of I Desire the Vampire.
Oh,
And
thanks so much.
you'll hear the setting that I did, and you'll understand why they put me on Knight Rider. So I did 77 Knight Riders. And you asked a very smart question. You said, well, Don, what was it like on a weekly basis? And it was exhausting. I was writing 20 minutes of original music every week. And the huge pieces of score paper with with the big architect's table that I used to write these notes, I was getting exhausted. I was just running out of steam. And every week on Friday, we would have the scoring session. And I would come into Universal Studios, stage number 10, and I would conduct the orchestra. And then they would show me the next episode. And then I would go home and I'd start writing. And I would have 5, 6 days. And then the copyists would come to the house and pick up the music and bring it to Universal. And they would fill it all out and they would pass it out. And then I'd come and conduct. Well, I was really wearing out. And I said, I gotta get help. And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, I need to hire an orchestrator, maybe 2. And they said, okay. So I hired Jack Smalley, a fabulous upright bass player, musician, wonderful man. Loved Jack Smalley, jazz musician. And I was a jazz musician, so we knew each other.
Yeah.
Hired Jack Smalley. And then Smalley said, we could probably get Ralph Kessler to do some orchestrations also. So I would start a cue and I would write out the beginning ideas, the motif, as we call it.
Yeah.
And then I would pass it to Jack Smalley and he would fill it in. And in some cases, he would actually write an original piece based on what I was doing. I gave him the bass lines. I gave him what the drums do. And so, and always, by the way, I always made sure that they got financial credit so that if Jack Smalley did a cue, if it's shown on television, his estate, because he passed on now, his estate gets paid.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and my friend Mike Post, who did Hill Street Blues and Law and Order, Mike Post is also famous for making sure that everybody gets paid.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, so I was exhausted, but every episode was different. If it had a Japanese motif, I hired Japanese musicians.
Okay.
I had a lady come in and sit on the floor with a giant koto and play. One day I remember I got to Universal early, and this was an Indian. It had some kind of thing in India, and I hired a sitar player, and I came to the studio, and there was this little booth set up in the middle of the floor, 4 doors, and there was a guy inside with a big sitar, like gigantic, and he was burning incense. I remember there was smoke in the little booth, and this guy was an authentic Indian player. I remember I hired a bagpiper. There was one episode where we were on the cliffs of Dover, and I hired a real bagpiper and brought him in. And of course, those bagpipes make a terrible noise, as you know. And, I was always authentic. I also had 6 players, each of which had at least one synthesizer, maybe 2 on a rack. Ralph Grierson, Mike Lang, Pete Robinson. I mean, all these amazing synthesists. And I figured out a way to synchronize them to the click, because we need a click. The film has to be precision.
Yeah.
When the scene changes, when the bad guy comes in, the music has to change.
Yeah.
So I would send an electronic click to the synthesists. We had big wires running out all around the studios. And we'd start the cue, we'd count off. It was always 8. So it was 8 clicks. And then I'd start. And those guys, because they had the click, they could synchronize with the film. because I had studied synthesis. I studied very seriously with Paul Beaver's disciples and Dan Wyman. And so I was trained, as a 20th century composer. And part of that is using. Have you ever heard of Penderecki?
No, you have to explain that.
Okay, Polish composer Krzysztof Penderecki, Penderecki, pronounced Penderecki.
Penderecki.
Brilliant, brilliant man. And he lived, when I was studying with Paul Glass was going to communist Poland and sneaking in and studying with Penderecki and bringing back scores for me. And this was a whole new kind of music, a quarter tone system, where instead of C and then C sharp and then D on the piano, there was C and then a quarter tone and then C sharp and then a triple and then D. So you have four notes between C and D rather than two notes.
Yeah.
And that's that noise, that's that sound that is so, have you ever heard of that score that I did called The Hills Have Eyes?
I have seen that movie. I didn't know you did the score. I have seen the movie, yeah.
Well, do you remember how uncomfortable it made you?
Yes, I was just about to say, that was definitely a movie that that made you shiver.
That's right. Well, it made me shiver. They brought it to my house, 1977. Wes Craven and I were in a meditation group.
Yeah.
And Wes said to me, Don, I want you to score this movie. We're going out to the desert. We're shooting this movie. And I said, well, bring it over. So they brought it over on 35 millimeter. And these big guys carried this big moviola up to my house because I was up on the hill. Have you ever heard of Wonderland Avenue?
No. I'm not that geographically well equipped on U.S. soil.
Well, let me tell you about Wonderland Avenue. In Laurel Canyon, there's a hill. And up in Laurel Canyon, there's a street called Wonderland Avenue. And it's located near Universal. It's near 20th Century Fox. It's near all the recording studios. And a lot of musicians lived there because geographically, it was perfect. They could call you up and say, hey, come to Universal. I could be there in 10 minutes.
Nice.
So,
yeah.
Right. So now down the street, Joni Mitchell lived in a nice little house. And I produced her husband, Chuck Mitchell, on an album called Dreams and Stories. So Joni Mitchell would come to my house. Across the street were a bunch of rude boys in a very loud band. And the band leader's name was Ray Manzarek. And they were called The Doors. And these guys were rehearsing all night. And the building, I went over there one night to ask him to turn it down. The windows were moving. The music was so loud. And this was Manzarek and The Doors.
Yeah.
Up the street was Frank Zappa.
Oh, right.
I mean, this is the music neighborhood.
Yeah.
So I was close to Universal anyway. And Wonderland Avenue. So they brought The Hills Have Eyes. And I put up the film. You know, the moviola has two reels. You've got picture and audio.
Yeah.
And it was so scary, I turned it off.
Right. Yeah.
I called Wes and I said, listen, man, how much time have I got? He said, well, you got some time. Why? I said, I can't work at night. I said, this movie is too frightening. And I can't do it at night. So I did in the daytime.
Yeah.
And I used these strange interwoven, these string parts that are so unpleasant to the ear.
Yeah.
That's how you get the mood.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, the characters that were wearing the necklaces with the bones and the ammunition.
Yeah.
I had the prop master. I called him and I said, it's me, it's Peake. Bring the necklaces to the studio. We're recording the score tomorrow. And he said, why do you want the necklaces? I said, we're going to use them as musical instruments in the score.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah.
So we had Gary Coleman, big tall Gary Coleman. He would hold the necklaces And as the music was going and they're running through the desert, he's shaking these necklaces as part of the score.
Yeah, yeah,
So that's the kind of training I had. Classical music, modern, 20th century composition.
yeah.
And now we've got Knight Rider. And we have a chance to use some synthesis. I got to play. Are you aware that I was in a couple of the shows?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, I am. Yes, Short Notice is one of them. I think playing the band in the bar.
In a bar,
Yeah,
in a funky little bar, up in a place called San Fernando Valley, way up in the valley. And it was very hard for me because as a studio musician, when I have a guitar in my hands and I hear music, I start playing. But on a movie set, you're not allowed to play. You move your hand, but you never touch. And they kept having to stop and say, Peake, shut up. Because they're recording dialogue and they don't want to hear me twanging in the background.
no.
I would go to David's house. We were friends. And he was lovely. And at that point, he was married to a beautiful young lady. And, when you asked me about a favorite score, and I said Scent of the Roses.
Yeah.
And that's because I knew them. I knew they were married. And I understood the heartbreak. And I always thought that was one of my best scores.
And that both the heartbreak and the hate, all the feelings they are conveyed so fantastically. Of course, in Scent of Roses, where we have feelings that go beyond what we have in other episodes. But I think also it is a testament to your work, the way the emotions kind of bring the show out of the television and into the couch for the viewer. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, knowing Stevie, Catherine Hickland.
Yeah. I had the pleasure of meeting her and also talking to her and making an interview similar like this in Atlanta last year. Oh, sorry, this summer actually. Sorry.
I almost went, but because of COVID, it just didn't seem like a good idea.
No.
But I will probably go next year.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Funny. We would have met each other.
Yeah, I hope to be there next year as well.
Excellent. Excellent.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Now this car of yours, I want to give you some advice. What the fans don't know is that there were like 4 different permutations of the car. They had one where the trunk was filled with lead so that when it took off, there was weight in the back of the car because obviously it's a front engine car.
Yeah.
So the first thing it's going to do is it's going to start nose down. Yeah. So this car had weight in the trunk and it balanced the car so that when it did that ramp, and these, God knows, these were real stunts. There was no CGI.
No.
This was Jack Gill.
No, there's something honest about a car flying through the air.
That's Jack Gill, man. That he was doing it. But the thing you don't know, or maybe you do, Jacob, is when they landed. Did you ever see any of the outtakes?
Yeah, not very pretty.
Not very pretty. The front wheels came off. Yeah. The windshield would splatter and break out.
Yeah.
Oh, it was wild. Yeah. But anyway, because I'm a car guy, so you have a V8 engine, and you have a single 4-barrel carburetor, I assume.
Yeah.
All right, there is a product that I want you to purchase. In America, and probably in Europe now, in the EU, cars have to pass a smog test.
Yeah.
And one of the things, I have a friend that's got a Mini Cooper S. We used to race Mini Coopers. And the Mini, he has one that is, I guess is 19 years old now. Supercharged Mini Cooper S. And he was coming up on his smog test, and he said to me, Don, man, I don't know if this car is going to pass. And I said, Steve, we're going to the store. And we went to the auto store, and we purchased a product. It's called Guaranteed to Pass.
Okay.
It's a little vial. It's a fuel additive.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a fuel additive that takes the water out of the fuel, because the gasoline that we buy for our cars is always got some water in it. And that's why the cars hiccup sometimes. So Steve, my friend Steve Walpin, he put in a bottle of it. I said, now put in a second bottle, even though it's got like a 15-gallon tank. And he drove the car home, and then he drove it back, and the car was running so much better than it had in the last 5 years. It was running efficiently. The engine was purring. He passed the smog test. And so it's important to have fuel additive.
Yeah.
And you live in a country where there's moisture, there's humidity.
Yeah, exactly. Very much. Yeah, yeah.
And so I just recommending, as your mechanic.
Thanks. My long distance mechanic.
Yes.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for that advice. I will do whatever I can. And you know, if I can't find it here in Denmark or in the EU, I can find it in the US.
And I drink it too. It's good for the digestion.
I love it.
So anyway, besides that, your car is a solid rear axle. It's not an independent rear suspension, right?
No, exactly.
Yeah. Can you adjust the camber and the caster on the rear wheels?
I think I can. I'm not a mechanic myself, but I think I can.
Well, at least I just bought an Alfa Romeo Giulia.
Yeah.
It's a really fantastic car, and it has independent front wishbone, formula suspension. It's fabulous. But if you stand behind the car and you look at the car from the rear wheels are a little cambered out at the bottom, just a little, maybe 1.5 degrees.
Yeah.
What we call negative camber. That makes a gigantic difference in cornering.
All right. Yeah.
Now the fronts, you can do the fronts. You can find somebody who will adjust your front end and get a little negative in the front also. That's a good thing. But a little negative camber in the rear is a great thing.
All right.
And don't make the mistake of having hard shock absorbers. You know, those Coney adjustables and all those grid shocks, they used to be too hard. And the new cars, they're learning that the car, if it touches the ground better, you get more traction.
Yeah.
And I know you like to drive fast.
Yeah, I do, of course.
But try the fuel additive. You'll be amazed.
Yeah, I will. Definitely. You said you drove Lancia.
Yeah. I drove.
And now you talk Alfa Romeo as well. Do you like European cars?
Yes, much better.
Italian, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had BMWs for a while.
Yeah.
But I mean, I started out with a Ford, you know, and a stick shift on the column, 1949 Ford. But you know, when I got the Lancia, I was racing for Mini Cooper. Oh, you'll like this story, Jacob. Do we have time still? Are we okay?
Yeah, I have all the time in the world.
Okay. And at 83, I don't. So I bought a full race Mini Cooper from a bass player named Bob West. And this car was a Downton modified Mini Cooper. It was a full roll cage. It was not even legal for the street. It was a race car. And I bought it and I started racing it. And one night we were in the garage and we had like a few people sitting on the benches. And then in the middle of the room in the garage was the apprentice. And the apprentice is putting the carburetors onto the manifold. And we heard him drop a washer. Clink. And it went into the engine. And we all were like, oh my God, it was 11 o'clock at night. And we were going off to Riverside Raceway. And I said, everybody, listen to me. I started yelling. I said, take the battery out of that car. And we removed the battery. And I said, now come on. And we all ran to the car and we pushed it over on its side. And then we rolled it over on its top because the roll cage was right at the top.
Yeah.
And we shook the car and the washer fell out. And I said, good night, everybody. I'll see you at Riverside.
I like it. I like it. Yeah. That's fantastic.
Now, so I was racing the Mini Cooper and I was out on Riverside Raceway. And I was going about 110 miles an hour, getting ready to slow down for the S turns. And all of a sudden, a blue car went by me before he put the brakes on. He dove in deeper and then he braked. And it was a Lancia Fulvia HF, a V4. And I got back to the pits and I said, what was that? It's in the same class I'm in. What the hell was that? Disc brakes? Oh my God, this was a very advanced car. It was a Lancia Fulvia HF. Yeah. And I went to the owner. It was a company called Auto Zipper. And I said, I want that. He said, I will get you one. This is the only one in the Western United States right now. Okay. And they imported one for me, a red one. And I'll send you a picture of it. And I started winning every race in the Lancia.
Yeah.
And then it set the record and did all those other things. But by that time, it was 1969. And it was time for me to stop racing and time for me to buy a sailboat and start studying music and studying with the real composers, with Paul Glass, with Dr. Albert Harris. My conducting teacher was Sam Krachmalnik, who conducted for Leonard Bernstein on Broadway. Yeah. I found the best people. I studied with Barney Kessel, great guitarist, Howard Roberts, the great guitarist, Joe Pass, the great guitarist. I studied with the greats. Yeah. Yeah. I practiced every day. I was in the room practicing. That's what I did. And, you know, we did Knight Rider for 3.5 years. In the middle of that, my uncle came to me. He had a summer break at Universal. Yeah. Excuse me, I need some for auto fuel here.
Auto fuel, yeah.
And my uncle said, listen, how much time do you have right now? And I said, Knight Rider's off for a month. He said, great, we're sailing to Hawaii. I said, great. Went down to the marina, Los Angeles, California, Marina del Rey. Got on a 55-foot sailboat named Checkmate, and we went down the channel, like always, but this time we didn't come back. We headed out. We sailed to Honolulu, 2,234 nautical miles.
All right.
I was an experienced sailor from the Coast Guard, and everybody had to steer the boat. We took tricks. We did an hour at the helm. And we were on 4 hours, and then we'd sleep 4 hours, and we're on 4 hours, just like the Navy. And we sailed to Hawaii. And it took 17 days the first time. And then we did it again 2 years later, and it was 15 days. And we did it again, and it was 15 days. So I've sailed to Honolulu 3 times from Los Angeles.
That is impressive. That is really cool. Yeah.
It's part of my career. Yeah. But all these things, Jacob, contribute to the composer who's sitting in the chair writing the music.
Yeah. It all makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, the studying is great. Life experience is very, very important. Communicating with the staff of the show. I was involved in making the sound when they added the jet sound in the last season.
Yeah.
I was part of the meeting. I was in that meeting.
All right. Yeah.
They treated me with a lot of respect about automobiles.
Yeah.
So now you ask a question.
Yeah. So you came in, and I think that every Knight Rider fan will agree with me that you evolved and improved the scoring of the show. But what thoughts did you have entering? Because some of the foundation was, of course, laid and the way that you take what was always there, what was already there, and adjust it to the episodes. I think that is so impressive. When I listen to your music, I can usually say this is from this episode and that episode, because they have a different sound. What thoughts go into that process?
Well, first of all, Jacob, the thing that goes into me, the thing that I get, I watch the episode and try to get a feeling of what's going on. Certain of the episodes, like Kit versus Car, this was violent. This car was trying to kill Kit. Yeah. Now, that's an interesting story, Jacob. Jack Smalley, my good friend, the score paper was very big, and each page of the score has 4 bars, 4 measures. And when you have a chase, it goes faster, right? Yeah. The music goes faster because of chasing. Well, that means more pages. So a chase is a long piece of music. And it was midnight. And I called Jack Smalley. I said, man, Jack. He said, Don, you woke me up. I said, Jack, listen, I'm in trouble. They're coming tomorrow morning at 5:00 to pick up the score. And I've got a 4.5 minute long chase here. What am I going to do? He said, Don, listen to me. I said, what? He said, it's just a guy driving a black car. I said, no, it's Michael. It's Kit. What are you talking about? He said, Don, listen, it's just a guy driving a black car. And I said, thank you, man. He said, I'm going back to bed. He hung up the phone, and then I started writing. He just broke that block.
Yeah.
But each episode has its own flavor. Yeah. And now I started using the bass player, Ken Wild. I started using a fretless bass. Are you aware of what that is?
No.
Okay.
When you look, I'm not that good with the musical stuff.
Right. So when you look at a guitar, you see my fingers and you see pieces of metal down the neck.
Yeah.
They're called frets.
Yeah.
Okay. Same on the electric bass. Now the upright bass just has a fingerboard, like the cello, like the violin, like the viola.
Yeah.
Just has a fingerboard. But on the electric bass, if I write a glissando, if I write a like da, because of the frets, it's going to go da ba 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 ba. It's going to bump over the frets.
Yeah.
So they made a bass with no frets. Right. So now I could have the bass go, and you'll hear it in the scores. You'll hear the bass go boo.
Exactly. Yeah.
Boo. Well, that's an electric bass without the frets, called a fretless.
Brilliant.
So I started using the bass as a voice instead of a horn or instead of a violin, to try to put it down in the rhythm section.
Yeah.
Now, I brought the drummer for the Barry White. You know who Barry White is?
Yeah.
I played on all the original hits with Barry White. I'm part of the rhythm section.
Yeah.
And Ed Green was the fantastic drummer going tick, 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 tick. And so I brought Ed Green to Knight Rider. So we had a funky rhythm section. We had great players. And we had Dennis Budimir on the guitar and Dan Sawyer on the guitar. And these players, they're hit musicians. They're gold record musicians.
Yeah.
These were not, some klezmers that we found on the street. And there's nothing wrong with klezmers. Don't misunderstand me. But these guys are fabulous musicians. And I would write stuff that was difficult, but was playable. And we always had violins, and we always had French horns. So one day I wrote a note for the French horn that was just a little too high. And I'm conducting, and the horn goes bo 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 bo, and he goes boo. he held the note, and we finished the take and we shut it down. And he came over to me. I was still on the podium, and he leaned in and he said, "Don, don't ever write that note again."
That's fantastic.
Now, Universal, stage 10 at Universal was gigantic. And it was so great to work there.
How many musicians in the orchestra would you typically have?
Usually between 40 and 45.
Okay, yeah.
It was a real orchestra.
Yeah.
And
was that all musicians that you chose, or was that in the producers, or who did that?
well, there is a lady who worked at Universal named Sandy DeCrescent, and she was the contractor for Universal. So she would call me and say, "What is your instrumentation?" I'd say, "I need 6 violins, I need 6 violas, I need 6 celli, I want 4 double basses, I want 3 French horns, 2 trumpets," and she would call them. But I would also say, I want certain players, like the French horn player. I want David Duke to play French horn, So I was specific about certain players.
That's fantastic. During a week's work, were there any follow up, from producers, directors, in order to see is this going in the right direction, or is that just you delivered your score and they could hear it and approve it, and did they ever not approve it?
Well, that's a good question. The situation is this. This was before the big synthesizers, so I could play for them on the piano a little bit of an idea of what I was doing, but I couldn't create a real demo, and I was doing very well. They liked what I was doing.
So do all the fans.
I'm sorry?
So do all the fans.
Oh, thank you. By the way, Stu Phillips did something very clever. He found a theme from a classical piece. Now, you've heard of Delibes?
Yeah, I know that. Yeah. Da, 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 da.
Leo Delibes. And Leo Delibes had written a ballet called Sylvia. And in the ballet Sylvia, the March of Bacchus. And he comes in, and the horns go bum-ba-da-ba, bum-ba-da-ba, bum-ba-da-bum, bum-ba. Well, Stu Phillips took that and adapted it. And then there was a rock group that I just found out about. And I think it was Joe Huth and A.J. Palmgren that found this out.
Yeah.
And it's a rock and roll band that went dugga, dugga, duck, duck, dugga, dugga, ba ba. And that's where Stu Phillips got that idea.
Yeah.
I never knew that. But they see the historians find everything.
Exactly.
Yeah. But I want to go back to the recordings, because in those days, you asked a smart question. You said, where could you make changes? No. The reason is, at the scoring session, inside the booth was a big long console with the faders, but they were only recording to 3 tracks. This was not a multi-track recording.
No, okay.
It was not a 24-track. This was a 3-stripe. And what they did was they had a piece of magnetic film, and the film went through the machine, and there were 3 stripes, and it was violins, rhythm, and horns. So I hired a guy, Carl Cedar. And I said, "Carl," he was a graduate of Juilliard, a real classical musician. He's been at Disney ever since. He's fabulous.
All right, yeah.
And I said, "Carl," I said, "I need you in the booth." And he said, "Why?" I said, "Because Universal has a guy, and he sits there while I'm conducting, and he listens, and then he says, 'Okay, that's good.' But sometimes it's not." I said, "I need my own guy in the booth."
Okay, yeah.
To say, "Wait a minute, in bar 37, the oboe should have been louder, because we don't have a chance to remix."
No.
So it has to be right now. So we'd go back and we'd do take two. And the guy from Universal would say, "Are you sure?" And I'd say, "Yeah, we're doing take two."
Yeah.
And it worked. But there was a day, that the day that, the producers called me in and said, "Peake, are you getting tired?" And that's when I hired Jack Smalley.
Yeah. That's fantastic. So any other good stories from writing on the show? I think you've already been very you've already said a lot of very exciting things. Or were there any episodes where you thought, well, this is more difficult than usual because of some elements of the episode?
Well, I think we're back to Scent of the Roses again, because it was so delicate. And, I wanted to be true to the classical film score. I wanted to be true to Bernard Herrmann. And the composers that really laid that beautiful orchestral soundscape. So when you listen to Scent of the Roses, you can hear that it sounds like a traditional Hollywood film score. This was not TV music. This was, the real deal.
So you've already said that Scent of the Roses also is one of your favorites. I think that there are, I don't know how much you remember of the details, but we have some very, very I think characteristic sounds in for example, Soul Survivor, when Kid is stolen and Michael is drugged. I know that is definitely a fan favorite moment on the score side. Do you have any memories regarding things going into that? We also in Mouth of the Snake we have this David Dalton theme almost. The guy who's helped
David Dalton.
What we should say, yeah.
Are you aware that there was a spin-off that they tried to do called Dalton?
Yeah.
Called Vengeance?
Yeah, but it didn't really last.
No, it didn't fly.
Oh.
But that when David is being hypnotized by the music, when the music is making him lose his mind, as it were, this is, again, it's the part of the synthesis that I studied. This kind of composition where you're using a tone row, like a 20th century 12-tone system.
Yeah. But it is remarkable, because even when you sit down and watch that scene, the music kind of takes you away and makes it very, very believable that this is actually what turns Michael upside down.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Well, now I know you're in Denmark, but I'd love to come visit you sometime. Maybe that will happen. Who knows?
You're more than welcome.
Thank you very much. But I also want to mention, it's a joke about the first Swedish ace in World War II.
Yeah.
At the end of the war, the BBC was interviewing Sven Nykvist, who was a Swedish ace. And the BBC said, "Ladies and gentlemen, it's so exciting because, for the first time, he's allowing himself to be interviewed and photographed. Here he is, Sven Nykvist. Sven, what was it like?" And Sven says, "Oh, it was very scary." He says, "They had a habit of coming at us from the west out of the sun and attacking us." And so the BBC guy says, "Well, could you give us an example?" He said, "Oh, yes." He said, "We were over Germany. I remember all of a sudden there was Fokkers to the right, there was Fokkers to the left, there was Fokkers in front of us. And the BBC guy grabbed the microphone and said, 'Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, the Fokker is a German aircraft.'" And Sven says, "No, them Fokkers was Messerschmitts."
Love it. Yeah, and that is nearby Sweden. Yeah, it is. It is. So, just another question. There are a lot of 80s hit songs also used in Knight Rider. And I must say, I think I was 40 years old or something like that before I really got the idea that most of these songs are not originals.
That's right.
Can you talk more about your work in making
Yeah, well,
making
especially now because Joe Huth now has a copy of a tape that I found deep in my garage. Um, Universal was very generous with me and gave me tape copies of my scores on big 12-inch reels.
yeah, yeah,
Most composers were never given copies of their scores. And so I found this tape, and this is a phenomena called a sound alike. And Robert Foster wrote in the script, in the distance, you can hear the Rolling Stones' Sympathy for the Devil. It's in the script of Knight Rider. So they call me up. Hey, Don, Sympathy for the Devil. I get the record and I listen and I write it down, note for note, everything that the Rolling Stones did. And Julian Bratilubov, the Russian who ran the Universal Library, found a singer, and we made a recording of the Rolling Stones' Sympathy for the Devil, what we called a sound-alike. And the Universal did that to avoid paying all the royalties,
yeah,
because to buy, even a what they call a needle drop, just a few seconds of that was so expensive. Nowadays, they don't allow that anymore. But in those days, you could do it.
yeah,
So now Joe Huth has a copy of a tape with, I don't know, 9 or 10 of those sound-alikes.
yeah,
And he's digitizing it, and they'll be available.
yeah, yeah. A lot of your scores they just, I think, Thursday, Wednesday, Thursday last week were made available. So
Oh, no kidding.
I purchased immediately a lot of my favorites.
How much do they cost?
I think it was $14.
Nice.
That's and to me that's a bargain. I spent a lot of time listening to the scores. So yeah, so I've had a huge smile on my face for the past week or so in listening to all these yeah, because it's all great memories, and like when I hear it, I can see what is happening in this scene. So yeah, it is that yeah, profound in my life.
Well, I appreciate, the fact that these episodes and you can visualize them. When you think about it, years ago, after we finished Knight Rider, it was just over. And I went on to do other shows and other movies. I did the People Under the Stairs for Wes Craven,
Yeah.
which was a #1 movie in the United States for 6 weeks. And all of a sudden, I got a call, and a gentleman said, I'm a Knight Rider fan. And I said, yes. And he said, I know every episode. And I said, what? And he said, yeah. He said, and then he said, and I know people that have replica cars. I said, what? He said, yes, there's fans that have cars. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, why don't you come back to the Midwest? We're having a meeting. And that's where that famous picture is of me lying under a car.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen the picture?
Yeah.
And so I all of a sudden met AJ Palmgren and Joe Huth and, Mark Pewitt. And it was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So it's made me really happy that there's a connection and that maybe it's something that I did still exists.
Yeah, and it does. It really does, and it resonates to the day. And Mark and Joe and AJ, I usually say they are the glue keeping this hobby together. arranging SKA in Atlanta. Mark's brilliant work, and AJ and Joe by keeping it all alive on their YouTube channel. You probably know as well that they found the semi and the trailer that was also in the show. So it's really brilliant work.
Yeah, I saw the video on YouTube where they start the engine
Yeah.
of the semi truck. What a great moment that was.
Yeah, epic with the
Epic.
bird's nest.
Epic.
Yeah, it really is. So
Well, I'm so happy to talk to you, and texting is just I get tired of texting. It's so wonderful to see your face and to hear.
I can only say the same thing. We've been texting for a couple of years, and setting this up and doing it today is it's fantastic.
Well, listen, I want to invite you. I'm getting kind of tired, so I'm going to stop right now. But another time, you're welcome to. Let's get back in touch and let's do another interview. If you think of a particular question, or I hope I covered the subjects that you.
I think we have made it very good into the questions that I sent you. So it's been brilliant. And it is fantastic. It's an honor. It's a privilege to have spent time with you. You've not only done so fantastic work on Knight Rider. You have your marriage. I could start now, and I could talk all night.
Well, let's do it another time.
Yeah.
And blessings. God bless you. And I'm just so happy that you're keeping this alive.
Thanks so much, and I'll be in touch, Don. I'll talk to you later.
And you tell your kids, Uncle Don says hi.
I will. I hope they're asleep. I hope they're asleep now.
Okay. All right. Take care of yourself.
You have a fantastic Sunday.
Thank you, and you too.
Okay.
God bless.
Bye bye.